Welcome to the Cup of Joe Show, where we explore the journey of recovery from alcohol and drug addiction. One story, one conversation, and one step at a time. I'm your host, Joe, creating a safe space for honest discussions about the challenges and triumphs of addiction and alcoholism. In each episode, we'll hear inspiring stories and uncover tools that make healing possible. Sobriety is not a one-size-fits-all journey, and you don't have to face it alone. Recovery is possible, and it's worth it. Thank you for joining the Cup of Joe Show. Now let's get started. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Cup of Joe Show. I'm your host, of course, Joe. And before we get started, I just want you to know if you are struggling out there, you're not alone. Please don't suffer in silence. Today's guest is Richard H. from Noonan, Georgia. Sober since July 28th, 2024. He's a father of two and a man who's actively building a new life in recovery. After reaching a point where he knew things had to change, Richard stepped into recovery and hasn't looked back, staying active, serving as GSR for his home group, and finding a new way to live one day at a time. I'm really looking forward to learning more about his story, so grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let's get into it. Hey, Richard, how you doing?
I'm doing very well today, Joe. Thanks.
Man, thank you so much for your willingness to come on the show and share your story. So what was it like growing up, Richard?
Oh, growing up, Richard. Let's start with that. It was interesting. It was a good childhood. I guess maybe I was 4 years old, and my parents divorced, which was tough. And I think that, in a way led to a lot of these shortcomings or character defects I had, because, in my little mind, I was under the impression that, Dad, who was Superman and Batman and Green Lantern all rolled into one, he left because of something I did. And in a way it kind of was, is my sister and I are both adopted. And it came out later in life, early adulthood, that the reason he actually, in honesty, left is he wanted to have real kids. Those are his exact words. But I started out, really young, like I said, 4 or 5 years old, is the program I go to, wearing these masks and portraying what I thought people wanted me to be, not necessarily what I thought I wanted them to see. Is I've got to be what they expect of me, or they're going to leave. And that was not a fun experience going through as a little fella. And that hung with me for a long time. A lot of that resentment is, especially when I got into my addiction, was, it was because he left, right? I didn't have a male figure and to teach me this self-confidence, and it was just a lot of outward anger and just resentment towards him. And again, that was, is there a justifiable resentment? I don't know. It really kind of magnified, when I was into my disease, is when I found out, some of the true reason about that, and that exacerbated. I use that as an excuse. Justification and rationalization are two of my best friends. They're my running buddies for a long time, and that just gave me, there's that justification, and in my mind, it justified why I had been doing what I was doing, not just what I was doing at the time, but that's why. And I've got a damn good reason to do it. So, but it was, growing up we made the best of it. My mother, she was a nurse. And so she left, she worked at a hospital. She left that, became a home health nurse. So she could be with me and my sister more. I found out in college in an education class and what they call, or technically a latchkey kid's how I grew up. Again, Gen Xer, it was just kind of just go out and do your own thing. She remarried, I guess, I was a freshman in high school, so 12 or 13, I guess I was 13. The guy she married, my stepdad, who I consider my dad, he's passed away now, but, he drank, and he was successful. He owned his own company. And the first time I met him, he had a lady that cooked for him every day and cleaned his house, and, didn't live there, but, he did well. And I was like, man, I've arrived. I have arrived. And they got married. And, he also had a very well-stocked liquor cabinet. Because because he entertained a lot. And, he only drank scotch. So it was really easy for me to realize, well, if I don't touch his scotch, he's not going to miss the vodka or the tequila or the gin or the bourbon. And so, in high school for the weekend parties and that kind of stuff, I would always show up with a bottle or a flask or something, and hey, just for that fleeting moment of that party, hey, one, I had the ease and comfort I needed from the intake of it. And then I had the acceptance of my peers. Hey, Richard's here. All right. But then come Monday back at school. Hey, what's going on, guy? We don't want anything to do with that guy. So yeah, that was early. I started, I think my first drink that I really remember that I enjoyed, I think I was 12. My sister's 6 years older than I was, and she was a senior in high school, and she and her friends were kind of sowing their oats and doing the little high school drinking type thing. And me being the 12-year-old, bratty little brother, I'm hanging around and, they're at the house, and I think they were trying to get rid of me. And a couple of the guys gave me a shot. I'm sure it's probably Jack Daniels. It was dark liquor, and just to get rid of me. And I remember taking that and just that initial feeling, the warmth going down. I'm not trying to glorify any of this. And then, but just almost instantaneous, the thought was, man, I like this. I like this, and it was, obviously at that age until, the liquor cabinet became available, it wasn't, something I was easily accessible. That all changed when I got into college. My freshman year in college, I left state to go because I was, change of venue, meet new people, reinvent myself, that type of thing. It was, alcohol was everywhere, and that's how I reinvented myself. Hey, I could change who I was. It brought me that ease and comfort, right? So I could, I could do things I normally couldn't do. And my stepbrother, who, when my mom remarried, he came in with a deal. He was older than I was. And so I went to the same college that he did up in South Carolina. And so he'd put in, he and his friends put in rec letters for the fraternity that he was a member of. And so all of a sudden I've got these people coming to me. Hey, we want to hang out with you. Hey, we need you to come to this party. We want you to, and that was a completely new, experience. Wait a second. They're coming to me to hang out. So yeah, that really, so basically at 17, went to college a little bit early. That's really, I guess, we use the word careers when my drinking career really started. And and it wasn't just, get a flight of this or that. I mean, I started drinking alcoholically then. I remember distinctly, this was probably, it was January, so I was still a freshman in college, and I had to go up to Boone, North Carolina with another fellow. We were pledges to go pick somebody up that had gotten left up in Boone, and so we're on this car ride. It's about a 2-hour drive, and my friend, his name was Bud, we were just having a conversation. And I don't know what happened, what's come over you, man, but you've completely changed. When I first met you, you were shy, you were a wallflower, you couldn't talk to a girl, you couldn't, you just completely just transformed. And I didn't think anything of it at the time. I use in hindsight and the word retrospect a lot. So in hindsight and retrospect now, I'm like, well, yeah, it's because alcohol and drugs and other things I was getting into at the time were letting me do that. I had another fellow who was a couple of years older than I was. We were running an errand or something. I said, hey, can you swing by and pick me up a case of beer for tonight? He was over 21. I didn't have a fake ID yet. He's like, yeah, sure. So he goes in and gets it. And it was, I think I thought it out loud. I didn't really intentionally say it, but I'm like, man, sweet. I can have a good time tonight. And he looks at me and goes, if you got to drink to have a good time, you're an alcoholic. Now at 18 years old, I'm like, whatever, dude. Right. I mean, but, again, in our literature, it's, I think they use the word, it was a harbinger of things to come. I got a ticket for underage my freshman year in college as well. And so that's when I attended my first AA meeting. I was 18 years old, and it was like 4 that I had to do for the plead no contest, community service, a fine, attend a few AA meetings, which I used as a badge of honor. I drilled a hole in my white chip and hung it on my keychain. So I go back to college. You had to do that over the summer. And like, hey, look at me. Yeah, I'm an alcoholic, whatever. Yeah. So
when you picked up that white chip, what were you thinking? Do you remember?
I just thought I had to. It's this crusty old timer in there. He's like, I suggest you take this. I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't know. I mean, I was 18. I think everybody else in there was probably three times my age. And I could barely see them because you could smoke in the clubhouses back then. So it was just smoky haze. Like, what the hell am I doing here? And again, I'm nothing like these people. I'm an 18-year-old college kid. These guys are all crusty old alcoholics. I don't know what's up with that. That was a big thing. Is even coming in, because I've been in and out of recovery for probably 10 years until this last time, and that was my big thing, was always looking for the differences, why I didn't, convincing myself why I didn't need to be here.
So you had at least one friend who recognized that you might be having a problem. Did you even think, maybe something was wrong, or no? You were just like, man, this is just getting started.
At all, not at all. It was something that I realized I was good at. I wasn't big. I played some football growing up. Played soccer up until my freshman year in college, and I stopped then just because I was having, I wasn't a starter in one of those type of things, and but I was a mediocre athlete, growing up. But I found that I was a damn good drinker. I excelled at it, I mean, to the point where the backside of, like, again, talking about fraternity life and Greek life in college, you've got the events that, like, the Greek week type stuff. You've got, your running races and your tug of wars and that kind of stuff. On the backside, you had the drinking games. It was the one where I was the ringer with the drinking. You'd bring me in up against, a 300-pound lineman. It's kind of like Indiana Jones, right? With a lady in there just is drinking all the guys from Nepal, and that was me. And people see, I was at the time 150 pounds soaking wet, and I mean, I excelled. I'm like, hell yeah. And I wore it with a badge of honor, again, in hindsight, not the best thing to be proud of, but I was like, hell yeah, I'm good at something. And damn it, I practiced really hard. I practiced really hard to keep that fine edge that I had. So.
And I love your references, because I think we were both latchkey kids. We probably grew up in the same era, 80s and 90s. So your how did your alcoholism progress, or how did your drinking progress?
Let's see. Well, when I graduated college, one thing that happened is again, my stepdad owned his own, owned a company, and I remember it was maybe my sophomore year, between my sophomore and junior year, I was at home. I worked there in the summer times, and I was just mulling over it. I just don't know what I want to major in. I don't, I'd gone in with AP credits for history, so I knew I was going to, at least I was looking at something to double major in, because I was like, I went in with like 9 credits out of a 21 credit course for history. And he looked at me and goes, well, you're coming to work for me when you graduate. Oh, well, shit, I don't have to do a damn thing. I've just got to graduate, which just led to, college just being an make class when I can to. And there's that old adage that C's earn degrees. I was an A student, graduated high school with honors. And once I got that, why do I need to care? Because here I'm looking at him. He owns this company. He's successful. He's got these things. My stepbrother's the same way. I'm like, well, heck, I'm just going to follow right in their footsteps. All I got to do is graduate. But when I got out of school, I moved back to Noonan. I was living with them briefly. I was, looking around for an apartment or a place to buy, but there was an outside sales rep for the company. I put in this notice, he had, this is back when you were a sales rep and you were on the road. When I was doing this, I was putting between 1,500 and 2,000 miles on a vehicle a week. And he had, this fellow, he had small kids and his wife, and it was taxing for that. And so I was approached and they said, we want you to do this. And I knew I didn't want to do it. Cause again, I'm this wallflower, this shy, my self-confidence and self-esteem have been shattered years ago. Again, that's part of what the alcohol did for me. It brought that back into me. But I agreed to it just because I felt that's what they expected of me. And so I found myself, after college, a lot of my friends, I went to school in upstate South Carolina. A lot of my friends migrated to Charleston, Charlotte, and Atlanta. And so, yeah, I'm on the road. I moved. We have a family farm over kind of near Augusta, Georgia, between Augusta and Savannah, and that was my home base. But for 3 weeks out of the month, I was on the road, and that would be I was in these little towns in Georgia, Fitzgerald or Tifton or Jessup, and and I'm calling my friends and I'm talking to them, and they're like, "Man, we saw this band last night, and we all this fun stuff they were doing," and I'm looking around going, "What in the hell?" And so I'm finding myself in these hotel rooms. And so my average night would be I'd get done, making my sales calls, 5:30. Yeah, I'd swing by the, convenience store, gas station, pick up a 6-pack, get back to the hotel room, put that in if they had a mini fridge in there. If not, I'd get ice from the ice machine, put that in the sink, and go out and get something to eat. Most of these little towns had a Mexican restaurant or something. Go out and have, a beer or two, a supper, come back and finish that 6-pack. And I did that every night, when I was on the road. And then when I would get back into town, from where our farm is, it's about a 2-hour drive to Charleston. So most Fridays, I would knock off early, get back to the house about 4 o'clock. Basically dump out the suitcase with the week's worth of clothes, throw in some stuff for the weekend, and head to Charleston. And we do do whatever we did over there. I'd get back on Sunday night and think I could make up for not sleeping for 36 hours if I always slept 10 hours on a Sunday, and get up and do that again the next week. And I got to the point, I think my folks kind of noticed something. I remember my mother telling me one time, just casually, not accusing of anything, but she's like, I think you might be burning the candle at both ends. I don't know what you're talking about. Heck, I'm 22, 23 years old. I'm still, I'm just getting started. I'm in my prime. So then I think I did that for about 2.5, 3 years, and they brought me back to the home office, back to Atlanta, is where the office was, and I moved back to Noonan. Actually, no, I didn't move back to Noonan. I moved a lot in like a 5-year span. I moved to Midtown, 28th Street in Atlanta, right between Midtown and Buckhead, because I've been living at the farm in the middle of nowhere. I'm like, I need to be around people. I'm gonna move smack in the middle of everything. And here's the thought: I'll reinvent myself again, But that's where that isolationism had begun. I got this apartment, didn't know a soul in Atlanta. Was going to work, coming home. I ran back then still, before my knees gave out on me. I'd get home, go for a run, and then most nights I'm sitting there. I'd fix supper and I'd sit down and start drinking. I was drinking liquor at the time. Again, followed in my stepdad's footsteps, scotch. It was nothing to go through, a handle of scotch in 2 days. And it just, I didn't see that as a problem, because I'm going to work and, I'm holding the job down, and I'm just, everybody I know drinks. And I said I moved a lot. I was there for a year. Then I moved up to Charlotte, because we opened up a distribution facility up there. So they sent me up there to open that. That was a good ego boost. We're going to send you up to open up a brand new facility. That pumped my chest out for a while. And I had some friends, from college that lived up there. They also did some other stuff that I got back into, mainly cocaine. And it was almost like college again. We had jobs and all, but it was stay up till 3, 4 in the morning, go back into work the next day. It was just completely, it was getting unmanageable, but in my mind here, I'm managing everything. From there, I was up there for 1.5 years until we got it up and running, and I came back. We had a guy retire down here, the general manager so they brought me back home for that. And I moved back to Noonan in 2003. I've been gone, pretty much for 10 years. And, I'm coming back home, and I'm like, man, I don't know if I really want to come to Noonan, but I know I don't want to live in Atlanta. Yeah, I'll come back to Noonan. And, when I left, I really didn't like Noonan, didn't have any friends, but I came back, and it's the funny story is, mind you, I've been for the previous decade, 4 of which were in college in a dorm room. And before that, just, one, small little farmhouse or 1-bedroom apartments where I lived. So when I moved back to Noonan, I need everybody to see what I've done. I need to arrive. So I come down and I rent a 5-bedroom house on the 13th tee box of the country club. Right. So everybody can see what I've done. I've got a fancy car and, I've done well with work, but by God, I want everybody else to see it, you know. Um, and I started gradually running into folks from high school and people that I knew. But they were still assholes, right? We'd go out and they didn't drink like I did. They'd stop calling me or wouldn't answer my phone calls. And I'd say, hey, do you want to go play golf? Do you want to go out and do something? Well, they wouldn't call me. Well, they're still out. They were assholes in high school. They're still assholes. So screw them, So at that point in time, by that time, it was my disease, me and my dog, and we were the running buddies. Let's see what that was in 2004. My dog, we were at Thanksgiving, and we were down at the farm for Thanksgiving, and he got in the neighbor's property, and we don't know exactly what happened, but anyhow, I'm pretty sure that the neighbor hit him with something because he was after the neighbor's chickens. Nonetheless, it screwed his back up really bad to the point that I'd taken to emergency vet and the University of Georgia vet school. They had to basically put his spinal cord back into his spine, basically rethread his spinal cord in there. And, I had the vets up there. I had my parents. I had my entire family just put the dog down. Put him down. He doesn't need to go through this. But here's this ego of mine. I needed to show everybody what a good person I was. Because inside I knew I was already, I wasn't an alcoholic. I did not admit I was an alcoholic, but I knew if I could, that's where I think our book said I played the role I wanted people to see. Man, he's this great guy. He's taking care of this. But in the meantime, I'm getting pissed off at this animal because I'm having to express his bladder. He can't even pee on his own, right? And I'm in there losing my mind, and just the drinking just got worse and worse. But that was just an example, I think, of one of the first glaring examples of my ego getting in the way of the betterment of something or someone else. Was that just because I wanted people to see, no, I'm going to do this because I'm a good person. I was trying to convince myself because even at that point in time, I was, the self-loathing had kicked in pretty hard. After that, I met my wife, met her through a friend of a friend. We were at a Super Bowl party, and we kind of got introduced that way and started dating. I did a pretty good job of hiding how much I was drinking at the time from her. I mean, she knew I drank and drank pretty good. We were married for 12 years. So we had the 2 children together. I drank was drinking the whole time. She had major back surgery 2017. She had 2 of her discs completely collapsed. And this, because, let's see, my son was 3 at the time. My daughter was about to turn 6. He just turned 3 and she was 6. And they send her, that's how sick I was. That was on an Easter. We took her, she went up to the hospital on Easter Sunday, and they scheduled her for the surgery that Monday. So I got up to the hospital, early for that, and talking to the doctor. He goes, "This probably going to be a 6 or 8 hour procedure." I'm like, what the hell am I going to do for 6 or 8 hours? Well, right across the street from Piedmont Hospital was a bar. So I spent 2 hours there, and then I walked a block down to the closest liquor store and bought, what I needed there. And I sat in the parking garage for 4 hours and I drank while my wife was under the knife. When she did come home, she came with a 60 or 90, day prescription of, probably oxycodone. I don't remember what it was, which I promptly put up my nose in about 3 weeks. Drugs were not a big part of my story. They were a part. I consider myself a lazy drug user just because it took me having to meet people and find people to get them, but they were there. And I was like, well, she's not taking them, so she won't miss them until she did. And so it was highly advised by her at that point in time that I go and get some help. But again, for me, it was because I put the painkillers up my nose. Alcohol was not the problem. So, her, went in June. So her, a month, maybe a month and a half from major back surgery, with 2 kids, here I am at this detox treatment facility. Some people call them rehab or treatment. I didn't get rehabilitated or treated for anything. It was a 30-day detox. Other people may have different experiences, but that was me. It was just, hey, once I get it out of my system, that's all I needed was a break. Once I'm away from it, the stresses, whatever, again, the justifications, the rationalizations, once all these triggers are out of the way, I'll figure out. My main thing when I went, I was like, man, they're going to psychoanalyze me and tell me what my triggers are and what it is that I'll need to avoid. Well, if you want to call it a trigger, oxygen was a trigger, sunlight was a trigger. These things, I hate to use the word trigger, but hey, I didn't need a trigger, just, being awake was enough for me to need to drink. And, I was there for 30 days, came back and, I had to leave with some kind of a plan, so, actually, I got a phone call from the guy that was our exterminator on my way back. I drove myself to rehab. The Saturday morning, I went down there. I stopped by and bought a 30-pack because it was a 4-hour drive, so I had to make sure I got myself down there okay. But I was driving back and got a phone call, and he said, "Hey, Richard," I'm like, "Hey," I'm just thinking, "Hey, did I forget to leave him a check?" I was gone for 30 days. Like, all right, what time are you going to be home? Well, I'm gauging. All right, well, I'm going to pick you up at 7:00 for a meeting. I didn't know this guy was in recovery. I'm like, what in the world? So I started going to AA then, some NA meetings, but, I was just like, I've stopped drinking. I don't have a problem. The problem's been removed, but, after about, I said about 75 days, our book says you're not cured of alcoholism. I thought I was, and I hadn't had a drink in, 2 months, 2.5 months. What's one going to hurt? It was innocent enough. I do a lot of volunteer work out at the state park that's here local. And we'd had a work day, and as usual, we put all the tools and stuff away in our maintenance shed area. And we sit on the back of tailgates and have a beer and just kind of talk about what we're going to do for the next month. And I was like, oh, it's been 2 months. I'm fine. And, I had a beer. But on the way home, as the car just took that miraculous, as they tend to do, that left turn in the closest gas, convenience store, and it was off to the races again. It just... I'm not trying to make this a drunk call, but that kind of gives you the idea. And it went up to the point that my wife, she's one night we were sitting there and she gave me the ultimatum. She's like, "Hey, if you need to stop drinking. If you don't stop drinking, I'm taking the children. I'm leaving." Okay, and again, just going back to the big book that I read a lot, it describes the hard drinking, which is what I categorize myself as. I know what I'm doing. I drink abnormally. I drink more than most folks. Yeah, I might have some liver issues or some stuff going inside, but if I have a good enough reason, I can stop. Well, that was a pretty good reason. And I realized I couldn't stop. So I couldn't, I didn't, and she did, and she left. So.
Man, there's so much of your story. We have a lot in common, I go back to you buying the house, and on the golf course. I didn't buy a house on a golf course, but I freaking bought a house that almost died in for the same reason. The looky house, look at where I'm at. But anyway, that made me think too. But so your wife leaves with the kids, and you realize you can't stop drinking. What was the lowest point?
Oh, the low point is back up a little bit. Is when she left, the ego had kind of inflated because she'd left once before when my daughter was an infant. So at this point in time, she was probably 10 years before, but she came back, and I'm sitting there just okay, she's going to come back. It's me. That ego was there. When I realized she wasn't. And I was like, I got to do something about this. So I started going to meetings again, just with the sole intention of not stopping. I knew I couldn't stop, but at this point, I'm like, well, they're going to teach me how to drink responsibly. They're going to teach me how to moderate this stuff. and drink like a normal person. And when they didn't, or, I didn't listen, and I realized that was not what they were doing. I didn't get the whole, dude, you can't drink anymore. I was like, well, screw this. It doesn't work. Um, and I kind of, the first steps is admitted we were powerless. I didn't admit, but I just accepted the fact. Well, this is, that there's that my buddy rationalization, right? This is just what God wants for me. So who am I to argue with that? But in that same vein, I started going, to church. I knew something was kind of missing, was a little, church is going to fix it. Church is going to fix it. And I was going to church, and which was a good thing. I'm not espousing religion or church specifically, but it got me thinking in God's direction. It started to somewhat reestablish a connection that had been missing for a very long time. And I remember just one of the, I talked with one of the pastors there, and he's just, just think thoughts in God's direction, whatever, and they kind of use that. So whatever your belief or your conception of God is. And I remember I started to ask this question of him. It's like, because I'd been in 3 major car wrecks. I'm gonna have to way back up. One in college, I fell asleep at the wheel. Alcohol was not involved in any of the car accidents, but I ended up doing 360s down Interstate 20 and wrapped myself around a pine tree. I had a kid run a traffic light right when I moved back to Noonan and T-boned me. He was going about 65 miles an hour. And when I was at work one time, a guy swerved into my lane, hit my car enough to I went off the road, and I flipped it 4 times. And in each of those instances, the investigating officer, the state patrol or a sheriff's officer, was like, yeah, I don't know how you're alive, much less standing here. So, and people would always say, you're here for a reason, there's a purpose for you. So I started to ask that question. I'm like, okay, maybe they were right. God, what is it you want from me? It's a selfish way to do it. I know I'm not supposed to, I've learned sense, but I was asking that question. I was having that conversation with him. What is it you want from me? What is it you want me to do? What's your design for me? And he answered it. He answered it really good. February 2nd of 2024, the luck ran out, and I got a DUI. I'd driven drunk thousands of times before, and not just a DUI, but I got hit by a police officer. I failed to yield on a flashing yellow light at a green light, and I made my left-hand turn, and I got hit. As I say to this day, he hit me, I didn't hit him. I still got a DUI, but I was hit. I did not hit a cop. The cop hit me. And so, obviously, that was the handcuffs came on, and I went and spent a couple of days in Fayette County's finest, until I, was bonded out. And, I had a buddy pick me up, brought me home, and took a shower, went to sleep. And the next morning, just explain how manageable my life was. Is that I wake up and I'm like, man, I see my car is totaled. It's at a junkyard. I got a DUI. I haven't been to work in 2 days. I got to figure out how to explain this to them. So my management plan involved me grabbing a backpack and walking the half mile to the closest gas station and buying, a 30 pack of what I needed so I could come back and figure all this out. That was my management plan. And I was able to smooth everything over. I called work with, it wasn't entirely untruthful. I explained it was a wreck. I didn't mention there was a DUI. I mentioned the fact that I lost my phone and all of that, didn't have the telephone number. And so again, there were no consequences for that. And at that point I'm like, man, I got an attorney, and he kind of gave me, some advice, and I started going back to AA. Just so I could go. I wasn't forced to get anything signed, but he said it's going to look good if you get back into a recovery program. And I was going. I was drinking before. I was drinking after. I was just going. And again, I'm looking around and going, I'm nothing like these people. And dude, you just got out of jail, a week ago for a DUI. So the similarities started to creep in. So that was February. And June is when my wife actually filed for divorce. And that's that really hit me. I'm like, well, we've been separated for about a year and a half. She was giving me time to get my shit together, and I chose not to, quite honestly, and I didn't. And And that was a pretty, oh shit, she's really not coming back. Well, yeah, no. And so that kind of pushed me over an edge again. I use that as an excuse to ramp up my drinking. And with that fact, is that cost me my job. So I like to call those the glorious trifecta now, is after that job loss. So I was like, wow, I didn't see my life unmanageable. So God made it unmanageable for me, made it pretty damn visible for me. And it took me probably about 2 weeks after the job. It's funny. I remember I went to a meeting on Saturday night, which was the 23rd of July. I'm sorry, the 27th. And it's one I'd been to like once before. It's a big meeting here in town. It's the only meeting on Saturday, so it's usually really big. Pretty crowded. So I was like, I'm gonna go early because I remember last time it was kind of hard to find a place to sit. Blah blah blah. And so I used a little meeting guide app that kind of tells you where meetings are, and I looked, and so I get there. It's an 8 o'clock meeting, and so I get there early for me. Right, it's 7:45, and I walk in, and the place is packed. So I kind of wedge in and find a place to sit down, and I look up, and I'm kind of paying attention, and they're handing out chips. So it was the last Saturday of the month. It's a birthday meeting, so that they're doing the birthday. And I'm like, well, maybe they do these things at the beginning of the meeting. And I look around, and there's like a table with half-eaten food on it, and like, something's not right here. And I lean over to the guy next to me, and I'm like, what? The meeting starts at 8, right? And he goes, no, man, this always starts at 7, but it was a birthday, so we've been here since 6 o'clock. Well, boom, there's my shit. I stopped drinking 3 hours ago so I could be sober to come to this meeting, and I missed it. To hell with all of this. God just does not want me to be sober. Obviously, there was only 10 minutes, 15 minutes left, so I stayed, through the end of the meeting. But again, went to the closest place that had what I needed, and came home and got completely, ripped. And that next morning, though, I don't remember exactly what happened. But I woke up and went about my day. And Sunday was the day I get the day with my kids. And so I went over and I saw the kids, and it was I was coming back home. It was about 5:30 or 6 in the evening. And I was coming, and got at a traffic light, and I look across, and there's this gas station that I would always stop at, usually on the way to see my kids, so I get what I needed and get my ease and comfort so I could hang out with my children. That's how bad I was. And I'm coming back, and it hit me. Dude, I hadn't had a drink all day. It's 5:30. And the first thought was, I need to remedy this. Whoa. And I was like, no. And I looked at the time, and there's a meeting at 7 o'clock on Sunday. I said, well, no, let's go to that meeting. And I went and I picked up a white chip. And that's, that was the one day, the first day that the desire was removed from me. I'll say it till I'm blue in the face. I didn't stop drinking. The desire to drink was removed from me. I tried, everything under the sun, from, pills and medicine. I've got a really funny interview story, but yeah. And I didn't do it. And that's when that desire was removed. And I went to the meeting my home group now the next morning, and I asked a guy to sponsor me, and we got started with it. And again, I was out of work at the time, and I can look back now, and I think that was kind of part of the design, because it gave me a lot of time. I went to a lot of meetings, not saying that meetings were just it, but it got me to where I could meet people in the recovery community here local. I could focus on what I needed to learn. I had a lot of time on my hands, and it just gave me, it just let me jump in with both feet.
What was the hardest part of that? About that early sobriety.
Yeah. It's when the bedevilments kicked in. These things that our literature talks about, the bedevilments. I'd never experienced them because I never, my longest stretch of sobriety was that 75 days. And because I was 49 when all this happened. So I'd started drinking at 17. So it was 31 years. And besides that stretch during, that 75, 80-day stretch, 30 of which were in a detox center, I hadn't strung more than 2, maybe 3 days together. I drank every day. And so anytime something uneasy, you maybe feel uneasy or uncomfortable, right? I'm drinking. And so this desire has been removed, but yet that's when all these bedevilments kicked in with me. My biggest fear was, man, I'm going to get the DTs. I'm going to get physically sick. And none of that happened, mercifully. But again, my mind just started going nuts. And I thought I was absolutely losing my mind just because, I was dealing with life and I hadn't done that in so long. That was really the hardest part. But I had a really good sponsor and a really good core group of folks, just, that knew how to answer the questions I had. Obviously, I wasn't working all the steps to begin with. We started, at the very beginning of the book and went through, but, it's like, hey, just work on this higher power. And I was still kind of not queasy to put wishy-washy, I guess, on the whole God thing, the whole, higher power thing. At that point, I was still just wanted to, stop. If I just stopped drinking, hey, I've stopped drinking, even for 3 days, which for me was a freaking, miracle. I'm like, but why do I still feel like crap? I've stopped drinking. And that's really when I think the real process of recovery became more clear to me. It's not, again, I remember reading in our book, drinking's but a symptom. No, that was my problem. That's when it really, I think, sunk in. The problem's me. I'm looking at the problem every morning.
And then what do you do about it once we realize it's the problem is me,
Well, yeah, I was actually kind of, talking about, that and going through the steps. And when we got to the 4th step, I heard a lot of folks say, man, the 4th step, that was hard. That was hard. And I actually looked forward to the 4th step. The 5th step's the one that scared the shit out of me, is actually having to tell somebody all this stuff. Because, the thought had never crossed my mind. I'd gone to the detox, and I'd seen counselors and therapists and psychiatrists before, because I was expecting them to tell me what was wrong with me. I'd never thought, why don't you just look at yourself? It was just, whoa, it's that simple. Sit down and be honest with yourself. That blew my mind. And I actually really enjoyed that 4th step, and again, it took some guidance and some hand holding, from my sponsor and other people to really do it, honestly and thoroughly, and understand what I was doing. I could write down a list of people I was pissed off with all the time, but it's that last column that I did is, what part did I play in that? It made me really take an inward look and say, oh, wow. And of course, then for me, all those resentments turned inward, and I had to learn to deal with that. Wait a second. The reason I'm pissed off at them is because of me. But that, again, that's, that honest, self-appraisal. Just, learning to live and, learning to live with me. And then it's still difficult now, not quite 2 years in, is because drinking as long as I had, I'm still learning who I am. Right. And that really scared the hell out of me to begin with. It's like, what if I don't like me, or sober me, or the real me? Because I remember, my sister told me one time, she's like, man, it's so nice to have you back. And I'm like, I don't know who I am. I'm not sure what you're talking about, because I don't remember who you're talking about. I'm not sure if you do either, because you don't realize, how young I was when I started doing what I was doing. So I'm not really sure. Do you know who I am? I don't. That was something pretty frightening. Was, am I going to like myself? I'm going to have to live with myself for a while now.
Well, and I think we by working the steps, working the program, we become the version of ourselves we're always meant to be. And because I remember when I we got sober, and had family members like you did who said, it's nice to have you back, or I just want the old Joe. And I'm and the cool thing in recovery is I'm not the old Joe. I'm not the drinking Joe. I'm really a new version, a better version, I think, than the version, for me, what God wanted me to be all along, I think. So what did you discover about yourself, Richard? What are the things that you like about yourself, I guess, would be a good question.
What do I like about my favorite subject? Me, I really don't like talking about myself, but some of the things I have found is that I truly am, a generous and giving person. There are a lot of things that I do. I had a phrase without sounding terribly selfish. Back when I was drinking, there are a lot of nonprofits and organizations like that here in town that I truly believe in the cause. And I was helping out with, but when I was drinking, it was again kind of like I said with the dog story. I wanted people to see me. Um, and but I believed in their cause. I believed in what they did, and I'm still active with those. But I've taken more of a backseat role. Um, I've I do a lot of stuff, but again, if the camera comes out, I go the other way now. Well, that's an interesting question. I like the fact that I'm actually capable of being happy. For the longest time, I always just thought, I'm incapable of being happy. But today, it's the fact that I can find joy in most anything in the day, whether that's helping somebody else or just being by myself now. It was it was interesting is one of the things I talked about doctors and that kind of stuff. It's at the advice of my sister. I had a psychiatrist, and we did it was just after COVID, so it was an online type thing, and she gave me a little questionnaire, and she tells me that I'm bipolar, and I'm like, what? That's the answer to all my questions. And she, prescribed me all these pills, and they helped. But I remember it scared me to death when I lost my job because I didn't. This is completely not the question you asked me, but I'm like, I don't have insurance. I'm not gonna. How am I gonna make? How am I gonna not lose my ever living crap? And it comes to find out that I wasn't bipolar. I was just an alcoholic. Um, but again, but by saying that it was bipolar and manic depressive is what she had you know prescribed, whatever, diagnosed me with, and it was just always just that feeling of dread and doom, and that's just one thing now I don't have. Is that I'm capable of actually enjoying life and being happy and finding joy in the small things. Um, you know, uh, yeah, being able to ask for help, that was never anything I could do in the past. If I didn't know how to do it and I couldn't pay somebody to do it, then screw it. Um, but I'm learning all kinds of new things that I can do now. Pretty damn good father. My daughter told me yesterday, Dad, I can't tell you how much I've learned from you just in the past 6 months. Yeah, I just, I think, I had such self-loathing and disdain for myself. That's just one thing that recovery's brought me. It's just to, and again, I'm still learning who I am, but getting comfortable learning this new process. It's maybe an adage. I'm dating myself now. It's a feeling out process, and I kind of enjoy it. Um, just knowing I can get up and the first thought in the morning I can say is to God is to thank you, because for some there were years my last thought at night was just don't let me wake up, just let me die. I was too cowardly. I wasn't gonna kill myself. I was trying to die a slow death by alcohol and drugs, but that was what I went to bed every night thinking, and I don't have to do that right now. As I get up and I get to wake up and say thank you, you know, just that positive outlook I have on life now. I think is I'm not sure that answered your question or not.
You answered it perfectly.
So
I think you answered it perfectly, and I think I think people there's hope in your answer. I think is what the cool thing is. I mean, just saying that you can find joy in most anything. You now have you mentioned your kids. I was actually going to ask about how's your relationship with them, and you just answered that. Um, that's the stuff. That's the gifts I think of recovery, and I think what you said was beautiful. So thank you for that. Um, what uh, what are some of the other good things that have happened to you since you've been sober?
Well, I'm gainfully employed. I've held this job for going on 2 years now. That's a big plus. Yeah, I think just the people that I've met. Again, you know, Noonan, the Coweta County area. We have just an Alcoholics Anonymous, 12 home groups, 12 groups, in our county, and I was able to go to most all of them when I wasn't working, and just the people that I met, and being able to to be to be of help and to be able to be a friend to all these people. Yeah, I do sponsor people, but I have folks that I don't sponsor or will call me, asking my experience, because a lot of them, once I was able to break that shell and get out of that little, introverted, I'm still pretty introverted, but, and get to know these people is just the relationships I've built in the recovery community. Getting to serve as a GSR and getting to kind of learn, get to know more people through that. It's just again, it's just, I think just the relationships that I've gotten in recovery, because I spent so long, again, with my disease and my dog, and that was it. And just realizing that, hey, introverted or not, I've got at least one thing in common with most all these people, so there's a conversation starter right there. I've got at least one thing in common with them. And that typically leads, and again, I can look at people and, I'm not perfect. I still, sometimes we'll get that prejudice right. Oh, look at somebody, you go, oh no. But once we get to talking, that icebreaker with somebody in a meeting, I'll comment on their share after the meeting, and we'll start up a conversation. Man, I got a lot more in common than I think this that feeling of isolation and knowing I'm not the only one, because I felt that for the longest time, and I hear that a lot, and I heard it a lot. I just chose not to listen to it. Is our stories are maybe worded differently, but they're all the same. And just realizing I share that commonality with so many people. Because again, that was part of that isolationism that I did. Is nobody else is like me, nobody understands. So I might as well just cope with it the best I can. I'll fix it.
I think we all suffered from terminal uniqueness at some point, and unfortunately, many people do when they come in, and they, like you said, you talked about it throughout your story of always seeing the differences until you finally saw what you had in common with people, and that made a difference. Um, so, what would you say to someone who is maybe out there struggling right now, and thinks that they're beyond hope?
Give your recovery just an honest try. If when I was struggling, I came in, and again, like I said, just come in, and I'm not going to tell this to somebody else. My sponsor told me, to shut my mouth and open my ears. Just come in and open your eyes and your ears. And if you think you have a problem, that's a hard question to answer. Just the biggest thing is that there is hope. Everybody's got a different bottom. If you think you've got a problem, just don't be afraid to ask somebody. Come in and it's a really hard question to ask. Because I hate to see people struggle these days. But again, I can't look at somebody and say, hey man, you're an alcoholic or a drug addict. That's not my place to say. But just take a look. And there's plenty of literature that can read. I think one of the biggest things that once I got to reading our big book is, man, I got the big book. I got it back in 2017, and I never opened it. And had somebody just said, open it up to chapter 3 and read the first paragraph, that would open my eyes then. Because I look at that and I'm like, that was me. That's me. That they wrote this in 1939 for me. I just didn't see it. But yeah, again, without being able to say somebody's, got a problem is, just be willing to admit to yourself that you think you might have one. If something seems, you think you're losing control, you just find a 12-step program, whatever one it may be for you. And just go in and talk to some people, because I've yet to go to a meeting where I was willing to go and ask somebody a question and somebody said, I ain't got time for you. Now, again, that also took me the willingness for me to go and ask somebody, which is hard. It was very difficult for me. But I've yet to be to a meeting where somebody wouldn't say, I ain't got time to answer your questions. It's just, I really don't have a good answer for that. Just because, again, not being able to judge myself is to say, somebody's got a problem. You just have to, have that honesty and willingness to take a look at yourself and say, hey, is this what, where I need to be right now? And again, I can't say if somebody's, drinking a certain amount a night, if that's a problem for them. That's really kind of a difficult question to answer. But again, if somebody's struggling, I would just don't be afraid to reach out and ask somebody. Horrible answer, but I really don't have a good one.
I think you did have a good one. See, you don't think you have a good one, and I'm listening to it from the other side, and I really think you do. And you said it. You ask for help. Old friend of mine used to say that a bottom isn't a place, it's a feeling. For some people, it's a dent in a Mercedes, and for other people, it takes living under a bridge. But for most of us, we're somewhere in between. You know, and so you're right. No one can tell us what our bottom is, but if somebody's there, I think what you just said makes sense. If they're willing to ask for help, there is help out there for sure. Um, is there anything you wanted to talk about that we haven't?
Now we touched on it. I just think, for me it was crucial, and I would just encourage, maybe kind of going back to that previous question. It's just, if someone does, choose to go in the recovery path through a 12-step program, it's just go in with an open mind. Because I went in, with a closed mind, and I said my first real foray, besides the thing when I was 18 years old, is I started going in, 2014. So I spent about 10 years in and out of the rooms. But again, just with a closed mind. I was going for other people. It was to keep, the wife, the family off my back, and I can come back to them and say, well, again, looking at the differences, man, these folks are talking about this, and this, I'm nothing like them. You know, it was funny. I remember one of those forays in there is somebody had asked me, why are you here? Why are you wanting to get sober? Well, first my answer was, I'm not really wanting to get sober, right? I don't have a desire to stop drinking. I'm wanting to regulate that. But I gave the little stock answer. I thought, just to keep my family intact, I'm doing it for my kids. And I remember he looked at me, he goes, that's a dumb fucking answer. You got to get sober for yourself. And I'm like, that's the most selfish damn thing I've ever heard. Because I'd read enough of the book at that point in time to read where it says selfishness, self-centeredness. That's our main problem. Like, hypocrite again. Boom. There's that bunch of hypocrites. You're telling me to get sober for myself, but yet selfishness is my problem. There you're talking in riddles, and there I caught you in your bullshit. So boom, right there. I say, yeah, don't need this. Completely contradicting themselves. I'm going to find all kinds of loopholes in this damn program to prove it doesn't work. That was kind of my goal, was to prove that it didn't work, that I was different, that it wouldn't work. I'm a unicorn. I can do this by myself. So.
And look at you now. It has worked for the last couple of years, which is pretty cool.
It is. It's hasn't been without its road bumps and its trials. But, quite honestly, I have not had the need, felt the need or the desire, for a drink. And I've, had some pretty big hiccups. Yeah, going to be honest with this. Is my, my sobriety date was July 28th. On July 31st, I got a telephone call from my ex-wife. She was in tears. I was at work and couldn't call her back for 2 hours. And, I called her back, and she was much calmer. And she prefaced the conversation by, "I need you to take a deep breath, and you need to be calm for a second." I said, "What? Whoa." I knew there was something going on with the children. She wouldn't have been that upset about it. And it turns out that my daughter was 13 at the time, had been raped. And the thought of a drink never crossed my mind. That would have been, and for me, I was, had worked step 10 quite a while back, but that is when it clicked for me that sanity returned. I did not think about a drink because in the not too distant past, my first thought would have been, I need to make myself feel better. Not how can I be a good dad and what can I do for my daughter? And the thought of a drink didn't even cross my mind. And my didn't say, I don't want this to mess up your program. I mean, she was thinking about me still, and I'm like, and it wasn't until she said that I'm like, "Damn, I didn't even think about a drink about this." In the not too distant past, it would have been, I'm clocking out of work, I'm leaving right now, I'm getting what I need, I'm gonna go figure this out. Like, I'm gonna manage this, and I didn't have to do that. 2 weeks after that, my third running buddy, right? It was me, the disease, and my dog. My dog, she was 16 years old. I had to put her down. You know, and it was a really telling moment. We'd taken her to the vet and had her put down, and my sponsor come in earlier in the day, and he'd helped me. He's got a shovel on his tractor, and we kind of dug a grave, and so I got her back and got her buried and all that. And I was coming into the house, and I remember I stopped at the front door, and the most overwhelming fear just hit me because I realized that, man, this is the first time in 22 years I'm about to walk into a house and be completely alone. And literally, it was a paralyzing fear. And then the thought process changed. It says, it's 6 o'clock. There's a meeting at 6:30. You don't have to be alone, right? I'm only as alone as I want to be. And I'm not saying that happened, within a month of my year. The time doesn't really matter. That just kind of are a couple of examples of just, things that would have led me. Again, I would have justified and rationalized going out and getting absolutely plastered, and I don't have to do that today. That's just something I'm entirely grateful for.
That's powerful, man. That's powerful stuff. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for sharing your story. You know,
All over the place.
no, it's okay. It was. I think you said exactly what you needed to say, and what people hopefully will hear. A message of hope. That we do recover. We do recover, and we do go through some horrible things in recovery, and none of it a drink is going to help. You know, none of it a drink will make better, and so that's. Anyway, thank you for sharing that. Um, I can't let you go, Richard, without doing our rapid fire questions.
All right.
So, no pressure. Are you ready, sir?
Let's give it a go.
All right. What is your favorite recovery slogan?
Favorite recovery slogan. I'm not very rapid at this. Life on life's terms.
What is your least favorite recovery slogan?
Do you hear me?
Yep. What is your least favorite recovery slogan?
Least favorite. Think. My best thinking got me here.
What do you think is your sobriety superpower?
Hmm. Wow, rapid. Sobriety superpower. My beaming personality.
If you could say one thing to your former self, what would it be?
Wow. You should have asked me this at the beginning. I got an hour of stuff. I would have said this is rapid fire. My old self, don't be stupid.
What song do you play to lift your spirits when you need a boost?
Playing in the Band by the Grateful Dead.
If you could grant yourself one wish to help with your recovery, what would it be?
That would be selfish. I'm not going to grant myself a wish. Wow. One wish. I had to pass on that one. Wow. I don't know.
All right. What step do you love the most?
Step 11.
What step do you love the least?
Step 5 still.
What is one of your favorite movies?
Braveheart.
And finally, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God at the pearly gates?
You kind of had some reverb there. What was it?
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Glad you're here.
Well, I'm glad you were on this podcast today, man. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, strength, and hope, Richard.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. And for the rest of you out there, if this episode meant something to you, please share it with one person who needs to hear it today. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, take a moment to leave a 5-star review. It helps this message reach someone who's still struggling. A new episode of The Cup of Joe Show drops every Thursday at noon. You can listen anytime at thecupofjoeshow.net or on any of your favorite podcast apps, Podbean, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and more. Just search for The Cup of Joe Show. Don't forget the "the." And if you're looking for your daily encouragement in your recovery journey, subscribe to our friends at thedailyponderables.com, delivering inspiration to your inbox every morning. Please like, follow, subscribe, and share because someone out there is waiting to hear this. Have a good day, everybody.
It's just a laid-back vibe, baby.
We hope you enjoyed today's experience, strength, and hope. We are so grateful you decided to join us. Please share this episode with someone who might need it. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Remember, no matter where you are in your recovery journey, you are not alone. Reach up and reach out to someone. Please do not suffer in silence. Until next time, let's take it 1 minute, 1 hour, and 1 day at a time. Thanks for listening to The Cup of Joe Show.